What is going on? All you fantastic human beings who are worthy of love. I like to use the language, introduce myself in Oneida, as I am English, Irish, German, and Oneida. So let's do some language here. Let's say, Sagoli, Nadioliwus, Skanagoga, Skanago, Wugnukdani, Wagitalota, Oniada Aga ni E, Gwe ni E, Lagwedio ni Yugux. Just started the class by saying, greetings, what is the news? Are you with peace? I am with peace. I am Turtle Clan, I am people of the Standing Stone, I am Oneida. My Oneida name means he is a good man. It is truly an honor. It is a privilege. It is all that and more to be able to learn alongside each and every one of you. So welcome to the class. Some newbies here, some people who just joined us alongside of us. We got a great cohort. We got a great squad here, about 40 learners strong. I'm a lifelong learner there, so it's 41 as well. But just wanted to say your responses have been phenomenal so far. So I just wanted to share screen here. Quick overview where we're going. We're going to talk about some of the responses so far, been amazing. Then we are going to talk a little bit about the Dwayne Champagne article you all had for homework to read. If you haven't read it yet, be sure to do that. Going to do a lecture myself talking about some American Indian history, some important laws, court cases, influential peoples, and then overview of the rest of the class next week for homework. All right, people, thank you all so much for the introductions. Be sure for this and for everything else here, the general rule of thumb is to read at least 3 other people's if you can. If you feel compelled to leave a comment, I would encourage you to do so. But at least 3 others, obviously read as much as you can. We have a lot of great people in this class. It's been phenomenal to learn from each and every one of you, all your eclectic different majors and careers. And it's great to be able to put our minds together. So be it in our minds, as we say it in the Oneida opening prayer. Open forums, always yours to make any comments. You see that midterm and final, you have some time until then. Midterms October 7th, finals December 12th. So good stuff for the first one. Still, some of the people who just joined the class waiting for a few more responses. Really appreciate everyone's response so far from week 1. Week 2, amazing response. Some of you made some videos, some of you made some just discussion posts, and it's just been phenomenal. Just hearing a lot of you just talking about kind of where you were going before the article and having a better understanding and better idea from Dr. Karanga's words, the breakdown, and from the videos, the different ideas of these different things. So I just really appreciate that and keep that learning coming. Again, everybody try to read at least 3 other people's. Always encouraged to read more as well too, but that's been phenomenal. So we go along here, people, to week 3. So can we count to 3 in Oneida? Count with me, people. We say Uska, Dagan, As. That's how you count to 3 in Oneida. Because up until the Native American Languages Act in 1990, it was illegal for Native American people to speak their languages. Let's keep on keeping on here, people. So we're talking about this article here by Dwayne Champagne. Then we are going to, you all on your own are going to watch this video, list of videos. Certainly welcome to watch more as well too on our YouTube playlist, but this is just to give you a base of knowledge of where we're going and what we want to talk about. Then for your homework there, you're going to read the article by Dr. Karanga, Black History, A Critical Review, came out in 2002. So important, as you'll see in this one as well too, some pretty in-depth articles. I know you all have a lot on your plate. And again, you'll get from this class what you put into it. So by all means, read as much as you can. If you are busy or if you don't have as much time, I would encourage you at least to read the introduction, the conclusion, the bold words, the headings, any things that are block quotes. That'd be a good idea to give you at least an understanding of where we're at. Obviously, you want to give these people's history, other people's history. For instance, the Black history, when Dr. Karanga is talking about it, the same history that you want to give respect to your own history. So I'm a lifelong learner. I tell you with humility and authenticity, I do not know all the answers. I'm learning alongside you all. I'm learning every single day. It took me all my life to still consider myself a native scholar, and I'm still learning every single day. And oftentimes it's elder native, so I feel like we're supposed to be in that role. So I still feel weird kind of saying that, but at the same time, I have learned a lot through different experiences, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful to be in my role. But that being said, I realize how little I know every day. And I remember growing up when people would try to teach me about my culture, and they kind of did it in the wrong way or not sensitively or not with respect. It didn't feel very good. So I'm trying to be sensitive. I'm trying to be respectful of you, of your background, of your family's background, your heritage, who you are, because you are a human being who is worthy of love, and I care about you, and I hope all the best for you. Whatever you put your mind to, you can do it, people. So that being said, here's the overview. If there's any questions about that, do email me. I try to get back to y'all as soon as I can. Really appreciate that. With this, let's move along here to the Dwayne Champagne article. So as you pull up the Champagne article here, some things to point out here. We will kind of fast forward to the top of it here. And the intro here, this abstract or intro, usually gives you a good idea of what you want to know, as do those keywords when looking at different academic research here. So Dwayne Champagne says the indigenous movement in the United States moves from the Aboriginal autonomy to be able to make their own decisions, have their own government, to quasi-conquest and domination. So almost being conquered and dominated completely, but not fully. There's a lot of resistance, a lot of pushback, a lot of people, I mean, we're still here, native peoples. Internal colonies, in tribal reservations and back to limited self-government and claims to sovereignty. This article traces the roots and efforts of the US indigenous movement to maintain political autonomy, land, and cultural autonomy within the legal, political, and cultural institutions of the United States. The American Indian experience is quite different from the experiences of most indigenous peoples, but the US indigenous movement illustrates some fundamental points of indigenous perspectives and provides a model for defining indigenous relations with nation states. So we're looking specifically in this article about indigenous peoples, what are now the United States. When it's looking at this idea too, it's interesting art when you read this in the article, the moving and relative west, about what the different directions could mean to different tribes, even in a spiritual sense. And again, tribes, I'm not, let me tell you here that Native American people are not a monolith. So like, I'm not gonna hear you can speak on behalf of all Native peoples. That there's over 7.5 million Native people in the last 2020 census. That's just from federally recognized tribes. There's also hundreds of tribes here that are not recognized, but they're still here with their culture, with the language, with the history. So even more than the census, because of quarantine, we didn't even get all the full numbers that we needed to of people in rural areas. So at least 7.5 million, additionally a few million more or more of Native peoples who are still here as well too. If you ask many different Native people, you get many different perspectives. And each tribe is so different. Each tribe having their own origin story. Of the over 2,000 tribes here at the time of colonization on what we call Turtle Island, referring to North America, it'll be even more tribes in South America as well too. So being all connected before the Panama Canal. So there's all one continent at the time before colonization. So that being said, many different tribes can have a lot of different histories. So as we talk about Native peoples, we're gonna do it as a whole as well too. Whenever possible, it's you want to use like the specific tribe of the person you're talking about, or the identity, or the people, or the treaty, what have you. But that being said, it's important to learn. The more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. And we are here on these traditional lands we recognize them here on the Gabrielino Tongva lands, as you might hear Cal State Long Beach referred to as Cal State Pavunga, which is the Gabrielino Tongva word for the great gathering place or the sacred gathering place. So that's where we are. We're also on Wenenyo Achiman territory as well, neighboring many different tribes being the Chumash and others as well too. So that being said, over about 109 tribes in California, about 109 to 111 and others, more tribes that are not state recognized, but they're again, tribes that are here with a language of people still here. So that being said, we're taking a broad view, kind of that eagle perspective, but we're, when you go in more in depth, each tribe's gonna have their own specific history as well too. So we're going through the Champaign article here. The next section that it's going to go through talks about some of the law cases. I'll talk about those in a minute here as well too. Talk about some of the different statutes. I'll talk about those statutes being things that are put forth by Congress and Senate, put into law. Self-determination movement, we will also talk about that. This is the 1970s, and this comes about through activism and through legislation, being laws and different things. And that is going to bring us through to policy, legacy, and future. One of the final notes here is the differing cultures, philosophies, rights, and preferred institutional relations between the United States and American and Indian nations will continue to be points of political contention and negotiation in the foreseeable future. As Indian nations gain greater economic and political capabilities for self-government, they will work to negotiate greater understanding and create common cultural and political ground that will result in more effective and consensual government-to-government relations with state, federal, and local governments. So deeply appreciate the words of Dwayne Champagne there. And with that, we're going to move along here to this lecture presentation that I have here. It's a little bit dark right here. We're on a California on the power alert. So we're not supposed to have using any lights right now until 9 p.m. So I do apologize for that here. Trying to beat the sun. Okay, presentation here. Time to take in, let's get into it. Here we go. Y'all are human beings who are worthy of love. Invitation, not an obligation. Take the deepest breath of love you've had all day. Breathe in some love. Exhale some love. Yawanko Ganalunqua means thank you and I love you in Oneida. Let's keep on keeping on. So some of the federal policies here. Doctrine of Discovery 1493. It's the palpable bull from the Pope saying any lands that are not inhabited by Christian peoples are therefore considered terra nullius, being void or empty earth, and they can be taken. This is cited later in the 2000s in a Supreme Court case by Ruth Bader Ginsburg to justify the taking of lands from Oneida. So it's still very much alive. It has not been rescinded, has not been taken back yet, although it could be by the Pope at any given time, and it should be. Highly recommend it. Indian Commerce Clause in the Constitution recognizes that in the Constitution itself, that it says that the United States government is to interact with tribal nations the same way as they do with states and international countries. We'll get to that soon. Indian Removal Act 1830, and this is one example of this would be the Trail of Tears. This was one of many long walks of attempted extermination, what would be genocide, the attempted destruction or the destruction of a people or culture or language. And this is happening towards Native peoples. And we consider this still happening. If you're familiar with missing and murdered Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous Two-Spirit, or missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, something that still happens at alarming rates that is much higher than their non-Native counterparts in terms of Native women being harassed or being sexually abused, things of this nature. Let's continue on here. So Indian Removal Act was a forcible, was a legal, what we call extermination of attempted extermination of Native peoples. Major Crimes Act says that the federal government can step into tribal nations, even though they have these reservations. So we can step in for different major crimes where we see fit in terms of enforcing different laws and different things. The Dawes Act, 1887, also known as the Indian Allotment Act. And the idea was that much of Oklahoma, as we know it today, was supposed to be what was considered Indian country, or like all a native land base. And then once the federal government realized, oh, we can actually just sell this land off and we can just sell it to different allotments to people. This was also known as the Dawes Act, or the Indian Allotment Act of 1887. So very detrimental towards native sovereignty, just the native lands. Think about this at all points. What we know today is the United States, all native lands. And still today, one of these sites you look at is native-land.ca, shows you the different lands of people that you're on right now, or if you go see across Turtle Island. And also different indigenous peoples across the world in that site as well too. It's very interesting. Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. Before that, Native peoples were not citizens of the United States. So meaning, when my great-grandfather, who was served in World War I, who is a full Oneida person, when he served in World War I, he did that without being a United States citizen. So him and 12,000 other Native people served in World War I before they were US citizens. Another person would be Jim Thorpe, who won a gold medal for the United States before he was a US citizen as well too. Did that in the 1912 Olympics in Sweden. And there's a long story with that. We'll get to it throughout the semester as well too. Public Law 280, it's 1953. It shifts this inherent relationship that we learned about in the Indian Commerce Clause about the federal government supposed to be working with tribes. Public Law 280 puts now that relationship between tribes and the states. So it shifts that inherent sovereign relationship and diminishes that sovereignty. Indian Relocation Act in 1956 is where the government came and said, hey, we're going to advertise. You want jobs, you want housing, you want education in different cities. Come to Los Angeles, Oakland, New York, Seattle, Chicago, St. Louis, many different major cities. But kind of what happened was when many people got taken out of these different places and put in, one interview I've heard someone talk about in a video is saying that when they were taken from their reservation, they were put into Oakland. They were dropped off in a pretty poverty-stricken area, and their first kind of reaction is, well, hold on, where are we? Like, this is what we just came from. This is kind of this poverty is what we just came from, and many different promises about like kind of housing or help. To my understanding, I've heard it said there's either some people were just dropped off with no help, and some people, the minute they had their first paycheck of any kind, it was like, okay, now you're on your own. You're officially good. So kind of the idea was to diminish Native people's sovereignty, diminish their rights by getting them away from their traditional lands even more so, to assimilate them. You've heard this notion called blood quantum. Maybe you have, maybe you have not. This is a colonial mindset. This comes from colonialism to try to measure Native peoples. And you think about how blood quantum is used for different Native peoples, we talk about African-American, Black American peoples in this country, and about how there's the one drop rule. And now in different states, another this rule of one drop rule. If you have one drop of African-American blood, you're considered African-American, considered Black, right? And that goes counter to this Native mindset, or this exact opposite mindset. It's like you have to be able to prove a certain amount of blood quantum for you to be seen as a Native person. So it's pretty wild that horses, dogs, and Native Americans are really the only beings that have to prove their blood quantum as well too. So many different tribes, that's 1/4 is the cutoff. For example, my tribe right now, we're 1/4. Although we're in big discussions right now with our Sustain Oneida conversation, if we want to move that to 1/8 of how we want to have the future of our tribe for generations to come. But anyways, talking about Voting Rights Act next. So Voting Rights Act was 1965. Until this point, many Native people did not have the right to vote. So you think about being in a democracy, being in this republic that we're in, people not this representative republic, but not having a chance to vote. Like, what does that mean as well too? Up until 1965, many Native peoples. Indian Self-Determination Act. So it's 1975. A little bit of what Champagne was talking about as well too, in terms of that sovereignty, self-determination, that nation-to-nation relationship, kind of going back to that inherent, what it's supposed to be in the Constitution. American Indian Religious Freedom Act, 1978. Up until then, it's illegal for Native peoples to practice their religions. An Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, 1988, gives Native people the ability to have gamings as a way for funds and as a way to combat intergenerational trauma and to combat everything that's been taken through in terms of lands and dispossession of lands. So a way to try to combat that. Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1989 says that any crafts or things that appear to be made by Native peoples have to either be actually made by Native peoples or have to be benefiting Native peoples directly. So that's one as well too. Native American Languages Act 1990 we talked about. Up until then, illegal to speak their language. So my grandma would sing to me in the bathtub when I was first born. I was born in '89 for context. So that would have been illegal when I was a young child. So think about that as well too. Not born forever ago. NAGPRA is the next one here. Native American Graves Protection and Native American Graves and Repatriation Protection and Repatriation Act. I left the protection off there on accident, but that's NAGPRA for short. Very important law as well too. We have specific California NAGPRA laws as well too that specific play into, for instance, the land that we're on here at Pavona in terms of the Gabrielino Tongva people and other California natives and their allies working to return different people's bodies, ancestors to be able to have proper burials. And for many different native peoples, this idea of land, language, identity, peoples, it's all very closely related. Even when you think about our DNA of how closely related like the dirt and the soil is to like our actual is us as human beings. And also in terms of that we as human beings, we're 60% water and our planet 70% water. I've heard that water is our first medicine. All that to be said, it's just very important. You'll also see this as well too with Indian boarding schools. Maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't. If you're seeing on the news, the Indian residential schools, over 150 of those were actually based off the Indian boarding schools in the United States, as there was over 400 of the Indian boarding schools in the US. The first one was Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. My great-grandfather was forced to attend there. The motto was to kill the Indian, to save the man. Awful things. So that being said, there was, at Carlisle alone, there was 180 different tombstones for all the children who died at school. Children who died at school who were killed or had disease, but oftentimes they were killed while they were attending school there. For instance, my great grandpa, he was beaten. All he knew was yes or no in English for a while. So he was beaten when because he only knew Oneida. But if he guessed wrong or different things, or he's beaten for that, and he ran away from school twice. And some really horrible, horrific things. He talks about, and this is, I'm just acknowledging, educating, and honoring so you all can understand the severity of how bad it was, right? He talks about how oftentimes the sexual abuse was anywhere between 90% to 100% of all the students who went there, male, female, all the students. So the idea was that if one of the girls was to get pregnant from like one of the people who were working there, and oftentimes these schools were run by church officials, if they were to get pregnant, they would take the babies and they would put them in a fire and they would burn them. My good grandpa talks about hearing the cries of the babies, smelling them being burnt, and like seeing their bones, and just how horrific that is, right? Just not seeing people as human beings. The whole motto of the Indian boarding schools was to make people, and the idea of it was to make people hate themselves so much that the only thing left Indian about them, the only thing left Native American about them or Native about them would be the blood inside themselves. So obviously there's intergenerational trauma from that, of being passed down from trauma. There's also intergenerational strength and intergenerational resiliency of people still being here. What does that say about us as Native people? The strongest empire in the world tried to exterminate, tried to terminate my ancestors, and yet we're still here today. What does that say? Another one we're going to go here is Violence Against Women Act. That was first put forth in 1994, 2013, recently revamped in 2022. It looks to add more teeth to legislation to basically add more penalties to women, to people who are doing violence against women. And then go to United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, in 2007. 4 countries that do not sign that is it's New Zealand, United States, Australia, and Canada. One of the reasons why those countries don't sign it is because UNDRIP says you have to honor the treaties with Native peoples, and the United States does not want to honor the 374 broken treaties that have been federally ratified, which means it's gone through 2/3 approval from Congress, 2/3 approval from Senate, approved by the president, and have been broken. So we would later have the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2016. So that's a little bit less teeth than the UNDRIP one, but a statement of supporting Indigenous peoples here in the United States. Tribal Law and Order Acts put forth in 2010 was to support different Native sovereignty and Native laws to give people, tribal nations, more power over crimes that happen on their nations. Savannah's Act and Not Invisible Act 2020 put forth a database for missing and murdered Indigenous women and peoples, really important. Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act proposed in 2021 is to address that healing that we needed to address from that. I just told you about Carlisle. That was one of over 400 schools that happened here in the United States that we really have rarely talked about. Now there's a 60-minute special that talked about Indian residential schools in Canada, but not once did it mention that those were based off Indian boarding schools here in the United States. So we're looking at Indian Commerce Clause in the Constitution. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among several states with the Indian tribes. The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. That's Article 4, Clause 2 of the Constitution. And it recognizes that all these treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, dog is saying hi, and anything in the Constitution or laws of a state to the contrary notwithstanding. So it's saying, it's not like, oh wow, those treaties was a long time ago. It's like, no, this is the supreme law of the land according to the Constitution. Very important. Declaration of Independence. So this one doesn't have as much legal binding, but it's still an article that people tend to reference a lot in terms of our founding of our country. Well, if you look at paragraph 29, it talks about the merciless Indian savages. So it talks about this is how Native people were addressed in the Declaration of Independence. You can pause and read the whole thing. Got a lot to cover here. Colorado governor voids an 1864 order to kill Native Americans. This was August of last year. So up until August of last year in Colorado, technically it was legal to kill Native peoples. So it's important that these laws still be changed. And obviously there's still a great deal of need for it. If you're familiar with the Washington football team, one of the reasons why they changed that name was because of this. One of the first uses of this R-skin, this racial slur, was used here in the Winona Daily Republic. And it is a newspaper clipping here. And the first part of it is a Republican Union nominations. On the bottom half here, it's talking about how the state reward for dead Indians has been increased to $200 for every, I'll say it once here, but it's a racial slur, so I would not repeat it, Redskin sent to purgatory. This sum is more than the dead bodies of all the Indians east of the Red River are worth. That's where that term was first came into use in popular media. Also in California, the state we're in right here, there were Native American bounties in California when our state was first being formed. It was $5 per decapitated head of indigenous peoples, 25 cents per scalp when they were just paying citizens bounties to kill Native peoples when they first came here. The first year they rolled out this program, they paid $1 million. The second year they pay out, California rolls out the program, they pay $1 million. So horrendous, horrific, recognizing as we acknowledge, educate, and honor about the history about our own state and how do we improve, how do we do better. Some influential court cases here. Feel free to pause if you're a legal person and you want to know more about this. We'll go through some of these as well too, but we'll go through pretty quick here. Johnson McIntosh, this is when he puts forth this Indians only have a right of occupancy, so just making this stuff out of nowhere, but it becomes a precedent for law later. Cherokee Nation versus Virginia, recognizing that the Cherokees are a ward to its guardian. So again, making things up just through this narrative and storytelling, which becomes precedent in Supreme Court law. Very dangerous things. I've heard this pronounced as Worcester versus Georgia, recognizing that Georgia is supposed to interact with the United States. Lone Wolf versus Hitchcock, 1903. Congress has the power to modify or terminate Native American treaties without the Native Americans' consent. How's that for justice? Pretty unfair. There's a book here I took when I was in American Indian law, when I taught American Indian law here, called In the Courts of the Conqueror. That's really what it's like for Native peoples trying to seek justice in the courts of the conqueror. Winters versus United States, looking that the United States could itself abrogate rights granted to Indians under a treaty with them, but only the United States can do that, not other corporations. We go here to Oliphant versus Suquamish, 1978. Indian tribal courts have no criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, another big blow to tribal sovereignty. United States versus Sioux Nations of Indians. The Supreme Court awarded 9 tribes constituting the Oglala Sioux $105 million for the illegal seizing of the Sacred Hills. The tribes have refused this money, recognizing that that would be seen as the money that it was for sale. It was never for sale in the first place. It's been, in 2011, that was $1.3 billion. It's only worth more now. But if they don't want to touch it, that'd be saying there was a sale. The land was never for sale. It was stolen. Ling versus Northwest Northwest Cemeteries does not prohibit the government from harvesting timber or constructing a road through a portion of the national forest that is considered a sacred religious site by 3 different Native American tribes. United States versus Laura, 04. United States and a Native American tribe could prosecute an Indian for the same acts that constituted crimes in both jurisdictions. I'm going to go through this. This is where the doctrine of discovery was used in the Supreme Court case right here in 2005 to justify taking of lands from the Oneida in New York. So some really important ones as well too, as we get kind of closer here as well too. I would encourage you to check out these ones as well too. Navajo Nation versus U.S. Forest Service. Again, not the same things as a substantial burden to religious rights for Native peoples. Brackeen versus Zink, the Texas court tries to say that ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, which was trying to keep Native people in their homes, which was from a recommendation by the American Psychological Association in the 1970s, as it was showing the importance for Native peoples to be tied to their identity. The state of Texas, and now the Supreme Court it's up for a decision whether it's racist of really thinking that it's giving special benefit to Native peoples, and really it's really just trying to right a wrong and try to heal Native peoples as well. McGirt versus Oklahoma, much of the eastern portion of the state of Oklahoma remains as Native American lands. United States versus Cooley, 2021, tribal authorities can at least detain and investigate non-tribal members who are suspected of committing a crime. The NASP versus US. So again, it's not being double jeopardy, being allowed to have the federal government and the tribal nation be able to prosecute. And some good stuff here, people. So just a political cartoon here showing the corruption of some of the Bureau of Indian Affairs agents over the kind of historically. A picture here, famous one from the Indian boarding schools. It was supposed to be what was before and after picture of trying to say, like, look how great we've helped this person change or whatever, but really it's just the destroying and destruction of someone's culture, religion, way of life, way of expression, to really put them in this box, right? Of like a circle into this triangle thing that of not really putting someone's full perspective into. Just an example of lands being signed off away without people's permission. Occupation of Alcatraz, 1969 to 1971 by Native peoples. Some activism we'll talk about later in the semester. 2016, 2017, this is the Dakota Access Pipeline, which I was just there for a day protesting, but some people were there for like 8 months or so, protecting Mother Earth. This was in November of 2016 when the police and the different authorities there for the government were shooting water cannons, they were shooting rubber bullets, and they're also shooting bean bags. And once they were out of those, they're shooting like the beans that go inside those as well too. Unarmed women, children, elders, people, and they're all unarmed. When I was there protesting, all the signs just said that your prayer is your weapon. So all unarmed, this is how they're being treated for trying to protect Mother Earth. Now we're in California right now with a massive drought. I just think it's like, wow, it's interesting. The worst drought in I think something around 1,200 years or something like that on those West Coast. And it's like, wow, you think of protecting Mother Earth and climate change. Okay, this one's in Hawaii. Protests of a different telescope there. This is in northern Minnesota. Resist Line 3. You can look at that as well too. So just how the Native peoples were still resisting as well too. And some famous Native peoples. We'll talk more about this later in the semester as well too. Don't want to overwhelm you all with too much stuff. I just want to say, oh, it's very dark. You're a human being who's worthy of love. Hope you keep taking care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Thank you. I love you. Until next time in Oneida. Take care, class. All the best.